Hello guys, welcome back to our channel, and we explain some Java exception handling built in its type of exceptions like built-in and user-defined user-defined or custom exception. So let's dig in. What is Java exception? Java exception handling is a fundamental concept for building reliable and robust applications. This representation delves into the intricacies of exception handling in Java, covering built-in and custom exceptions, their hierarchy, and practical applications. So we have types of exceptions: built-in exceptions and custom exceptions. So what are the built-in exceptions? Built-in exceptions have two types: check exceptions and unchecked exceptions. These built-in exceptions are predefined in the Java API and provide a foundational set of error handling mechanisms. They are categorized into check and unchecked exceptions. For example, when you have an exception for check, for example, like IO exception, we code, but I don't provide the code anymore yet. But I have some friends that would like to explain to this. For example, IO exceptions. How do you know if you had an IO exceptions? If your purpose is to file handling, you would like to import it. But what is the difference? I mean, what about the others? When you tell that your exceptions is when your method is is exception, for example, when you see an IDE, when you have when you have like a wrong in your being compiled your code, it has read like that. So it means there are errors, or might be exceptions, just like that. While the unchecked is you will see at the runtime once you run your code. Custom exceptions, usually known as user-defined exception. This exception, you will create your own exceptions. For example, if you create your age validation exception, then throw that exception to make another throw that exception so that your compiler, you'll see it dog. Then yeah, so on like that.
Hey everyone, I'm AJ Scana. Today we're diving into a super important topic in Java programming, built-in exceptions. Specifically, we're going to talk about check and uncheck exception. If you've ever wondered why some errors need to be handled immediately while others don't, this video is for you. Let's get started. Alright, so in Java, exceptions are events that disrupt the normal flow of your program. They can be broadly categorized into two types: check and uncheck exceptions. Let's break them down one by one. First up, check exceptions. These are exceptions that are checked at compile time. What does that mean? Well, it means that the Java compiler will force you to handle these exceptions before your code even runs. You either need to catch them using a try-catch block or declare them in your method signature using the throws keyword. Some common examples of check exceptions include IO exception, which happens when there's an issue with input or output operations; class not found exception, which occurs when the JVM can't find a class; and no such method exception, which is thrown when a method doesn't exist. Now, let's talk about unchecked exceptions. Unlike checked exceptions, these are not checked at compile time. They usually indicate programming errors, like dividing by zero or trying to access an array index that doesn't exist. These exceptions are subclasses of runtime exception. Some examples include arithmetic exception, which happens when you try to divide by zero. Null pointer exceptions, which occurs when you try to use an object that hasn't been initialized, and array index out of bounds exception, which is thrown when you try to access an array index that's out of range. Stop. Let's look at some code example to make this clear. I'll show you three examples. First, let's look at check exception example. Imagine you're trying to read a file, but the file doesn't exist. Here's how you might handle that. So, in this example, we're trying to read a file that doesn't exist. The file reader constructor can throw an IO exception, which is a check exception. We'll handle it using a try-catch block. Next, let's look at an uncheck exception example. Imagine you're trying to divide by a zero. This code will throw an arithmetic exception because you can't divide by zero. Since this is an unchecked exception, the compiler will force you to handle it, but your program will crash if you don't. Finally, let's look at another unchecked exception. Example, imagine you're trying to access an array index that doesn't exist. This code will throw an array index out of bounds exception because the array only has 3 elements and we're trying to access the sixth one again. This is an unchecked exception, so the compiler won't force you to handle it. So, to recap, check exceptions are checked at compile time, and you must handle them. Examples include IO exception and class not found exception. Unchecked exceptions are not checked at compile time and usually indicate programming errors. Examples include arithmetic exception and null pointer exception. Understanding this exception is crucial for writing robust Java programs. If you found this video helpful,
So, good evening everyone. Today we will be talking about custom exception creating and using, in which I will be showing you two of them, which is check and uncheck. So, creating a custom exemption extends the exemption class for check exemption, or a runtime exemption for unchecked exemption. Define a constructor to specify the exempt message to in which it will be done in the runtime of the code or the error. By using custom exemption, it actually shows that throws the custom exemption when a specific error condition is met. It will catch the exemption in a try-catch block to handle the error and provide appropriate feedback. For example, exception catch your code has no semicolon or has an invalid input. So let's get started, shall we?
There are hierarchy of Java exceptions. First, the throwable class, the root class of all errors and exceptions in Java. Throwable class has two: error class and exception class. This is the diagram representation of exception hierarchy. The first is throwable. He has two error and exception. Exception has built-in check and uncheck, also in custom check and uncheck. What about errors? Yeah, there's some kind, but not exceptions. These are the ones that cannot handle it in a compile or in a runtime. They cannot handle by the by using exception handling. God, what is the use of exception handling and what are those? Exception handling auto handle, but in using try catch block it is the way to perform to handle exceptions whether checked or unchecked to prevent any mismatch errors. That just yeah.